Greetings on the day after Election Day 2020. My name is Rick Stafford. I'm a service professor of public policy and politics at the Heinz College of Carnegie Mellon. I'm going to moderate today's discussion of Election 2020. And to quote a famous ball player, it ain't over till it's over, and this election is not over. All the votes have not been counted. They have not been declared officially, and critically, what happens next is what we're going to talk about, as well as what happened yesterday. When we planned this session weeks ago, we anticipated the idea that the election would not be resolved by now. And in some ways, I guess we were projecting correctly. A lot of polls may have given you a misleading version of what might happen. But what we want to do today is address the presidential election, the congressional elections, and the state elections, in particular in the state of Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania has been ground zero in the discussion in the media for weeks and weeks. So it was very important to get people who know all about Pennsylvania politics as well as national politics. So I want to introduce the two folks who will in fact field the questions that I may fire at them. And in order to do that, I'm not going to read their bios, but I'm going to read some notes since I have no teleprompter on this Zoom call. Both of these guests are professors at Duquesne University Law School. Both were elected to local political office early. One actually to the East McKeesport Borough Council, the other to the Shaler Township Board of Commissioners. One became Pittsburgh Mayor Sophie Masloff's right hand and served in a series of public offices before and during his time as a professor at Duquesne. The other became U.S. Attorney of Western Pennsylvania, then Pennsylvania's Attorney General, and most recently, Governor of Pennsylvania. Both have participated in 13 presidential elections and elections in between. That should give you a hint of their age. Both are sought after commentators on politics. Indeed, for the past week have done numerous hours of commentating on what we're going to talk about today. So it might seem to everyone that they're like two peas in a pod, but they have one big difference. Joe Mistick is a lifetime Democrat. Tom Corbett is a lifetime Republican. And despite their choice of party, they've worked together furthering Pittsburgh's neighborhood redevelopment and over frequent meetings at La Prima in the Strip District have shared plans for the future of our region. They teach a course called Law, Public Policy in the Executive Branch at Duquesne University. In short, they get along. They disagree without being disagreeable. And for that reason, they are an example rare in today's politics. That's why I can reassure everybody that I don't need a mute button for this discussion. It will be civil. So let me turn to open the discourse. Again, emphasizing that Pennsylvania has been a constant talk of media and campaigning for weeks. And I think that, that right now, as I think everyone's aware, although news may come during our discussion, and I urge everybody not only to file your questions for the latter part of our discussion today, but also if any news comes across that we're unaware of because we're talking to you, please insert that news into the Q&A because it could happen in any moment that there are new developments in this campaign puzzle. But once again, we're fortunate to have two people who have been in the room, so to speak, as the governor likes to say, where it happens, both in politics and policy making. So we're going to be able to quiz them from the point of view of both what has happened and will happen in the elections, but also the very intricate matters of election law and procedure, which are coming increasingly into play. So once a governor, always a governor. So Tom, I get to turn to you first because you're the premier figure on this three-way group. You've been through elections in PA up close and personal, and I mean personal, for years. And you can speak with authority. What's going to happen nationally? And in fact, you have to intersperse, of course, with what's going to happen in Pennsylvania in order to answer that question. And Joe, I'll ask you to go after the governor. We'll give him the first chance to be right or wrong.
So that's a long question. I'll try and give you a short answer. Who knows would be the beginning of that. First off, Rick, thank you for inviting me and Joe to participate with you in this event that we probably anticipated we'd have more facts than we really do at the moment, or at least more numbers than we do at the moment. And I think it's a great opportunity to talk to the students of our two universities, CMU and Duquesne, and anybody else who's listening to this. The day after we've had one of the greatest exercises of democracy, which I will note to date has been a peaceful exercise of democracy. So we should all pat ourselves on the back on that. Nationally, at the moment, I believe that former Vice President Biden is leading in the electoral vote count, but you have 5 or 6 key states that are still undecided. Pennsylvania being one of those, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, all key swing states. And that's going to be as the counting goes on. Here in Pennsylvania, the counting is a little different. And the delivery of the results is a little different this time than it normally is. Normally, the early numbers come heavy out of Philadelphia. If you're a Republican, you're looking at the numbers that come out of Philadelphia, which is probably 90-10 Democrat. And you see this wave of Democratic numbers coming against you as I saw. And it used to be that the counties around Philadelphia were Republican. They are now Democrat registered. So you'd see these numbers come, and then you'd see the rest of the state come in, and you would see the numbers, evening up, and then if you won, going in your favor. This was different this year. And part of the reason I think it was different was due to the mail-in ballot this year. And it seems that down in Philadelphia, they've had a great turnout through mail-in ballot, and they're counting those ballots. So we're waiting to see what those results are. Mr. Trump won, I think, every county that he won last time, 4 years ago. In fact, in some of the rural counties, he's done actually better. Mr. Biden has won, I think, 7 of the 67 counties, but they're populous counties. He won his home county in Scranton in Lackawanna County, but he only won it by 10,000. And the county right next door, a heavy Democrat county, Luzerne, he didn't win. So we're trying to see what the tea leaves tell us about all these numbers. And it tells us it's close. He's going to close that gap. The last time I looked at the gap, it was about 550,000 in favor of President Trump. He's going to close it greatly in Philadelphia. The question is, will he overcome it? I don't think we know the answer. The prognosticators on TV are saying, oh yeah, he's going to overcome it. We got to wait and see how those numbers come in those counties that are still out. Allegheny County still has some votes out. But importantly, and I'll probably stop here, but we should get back to, we have congressional seats. I think the Republicans took over again the congressional delegation. They've added 2, maybe 3 congressmen over what they had before. So it'll go from 9 to 12. And the House seats in the Pennsylvania legislature is going to probably increase with some seats. The Senate might increase for Republicans a little bit. And Congress itself, the House and Congress, I think we picked up a couple seats. So it's going to be very interesting at that point. And I'll turn it over to you or to Joe, because I'm used to tossing everything to Joe and say, and what do you think, Professor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's toss it to Joe. Joe, go
I,
ahead.
I agree with everything the governor said. Last night, probably four of us with 150 to 200 years of experience in campaign politics, spent 6 hours on CBSN providing analysis. And the truth is, we had no idea what we were talking about, because this is a new kind of election for us. The mail-in balloting was really a twist, and it's hard to read. And it has a lot to do with when it comes in, which is also different for us. The old rules we had about the Republican key rolling in late in the night and just crushing a Democratic lead just doesn't work anymore. So the rules that we've come up with are no longer applicable. The one thing we can be certain of, and we know that Pennsylvania is still hanging in the balance, one thing we can be certain of is that there's going to be a lot of litigation. I had 2 calls last night after midnight looking to retain an election law lawyer. So people are starting to shop around. The big campaigns have their armies of attorneys already in place and have had them in place for some time, and they're looking for any little problem, any little irregularity that they can challenge in order to knock out a block of votes. In Pennsylvania or in Allegheny County as of 8:30 a.m., and it may all turn on Allegheny County, if you can imagine that. The presidential race may come down to Allegheny County. There are at least 5 different categories of ballots out there, each of which has its own problem, and each of which is subject to challenge by sharp-eyed lawyers. So we don't know now, and we're not going to know for a while, but it is a full employment program for election law lawyers.
Let me follow up, Joe, with you on that, because you do teach election law. You've been involved in reapportionment commissions and so on. So you're no one more knowledgeable. No wonder you get calls. But can you explain a little bit about the Electoral College process? And I know this is kind of an intricacy, but it's really important if, as you and the governor both highlight, Pennsylvania becomes a very important focus in the ultimate outcome. And what kind of conflict can be expected with respect to the electoral votes?
In most states, the electors are chosen by the prevailing party in the presidential race, and they'll choose them over the summer, and then they'll be tapped as the electors, the delegation for the College of Electors for that state. Now, the big question is, what if there's a tie? What if somebody doesn't get to 270 and there's a tie in the College of Electors? And the 12th Amendment of the United States Constitution addresses that possibility. It's not as clear necessarily as we'd like it, but it does lay down some basic guidelines. And if there's a tie, each state congressional delegate, each state will get 1 vote. And if you have a majority of Republican-controlled states through their congressional delegation, it's likely that those votes are all going to go for the Republican candidate, regardless of the popular vote, of course, right? And of course, the same applies if the Democrats have the majority of delegations. Now, what if that's a tie? Well, if that's a tie, the vice president presides, and the vice president casts that deciding vote, and that would be a Republican in this case. So the one thing for which there's no clear answer is, what if your delegation, your congressional delegation ties in terms of selecting that 1 vote and casting that 1 ballot in the event of an electoral college tie? And that could happen in Pennsylvania. If there's no change in our congressional delegation, it would be 10-10, because we count our 18 members of Congress and our 2 senators, and they would each have a vote in how the state goes. And if it's 10-10, there's no clear answer. It's probably likely that there would be 2 votes submitted, and the presiding officer would determine which one to choose.
Joe, can I add a little bit of research I did 2 days ago was it is the new Congress,
Right?
not the present Congress, that would make that decision. And I believe it's only the House. I didn't read that the Senate was involved, but they may be. It wouldn't change. And that's why I brought up that it looks like the Republicans will pick up 3 congressional seats. So, and if that's the case, and it goes to the Congress in a tie, obviously the Republicans would vote for the Republican candidate.
Yeah, the Senate will choose the vice president
Right.
under circumstances, which, is kind of wild, actually, right? You have
But how about Nebraska?
of having the 2 members, the 2 executives from opposite parties, depending on who controls what, right?
And so, well, how about Nebraska? I think, I've seen this on there. We talked about this when I was governor. Nebraska awards its electors by who wins the individual congressional districts.
There are 2 states that do that, yeah.
Right. Okay. We actually talked about 4 years ago, after we went through this problem, we talked about this, and nobody wanted to go with that process.
Yeah. Governor, let me ask you a related question to this kind of uncertainty that we're facing. Of course, the national media is all over this story as well, depicting various cities that are boarding up and so on. And you've been a federal prosecutor, you've been the state attorney general. What kind of fear do you have of potential violence because of one party or another party being unnecessarily and just disappointed to an nth degree in the results?
I don't know that I would categorize it as a fear. I have one hope that won't happen, number one. And I was also an assistant district attorney, so I handled cases at the local level. I do have a concern that some protagonists, not necessarily Republicans or Democrats, but some protagonists are out there that could view this as a way to start some trouble, which is what they want to do. And as you've probably seen, there were 3 instances here in Allegheny County. It was a similar one in Texas where somebody spray painted on the 2 congressmen, Connor Lamb and Mike Doyle, and on the candidate the Republicans have up, Sean Purnell, on his garage. They did it on the offices of the congressman. Revolution, no vote, revolution now, or revolution yes, with a upside down hammer and sickle, which is a symbol of the old Soviet Union. And they did it in red paint. There's people out there that are going to do that. They're instigators. And we've seen trouble when we've had peaceful marches turn into not so peaceful marches. Not, I don't think, by the marchers themselves in the beginning, but by instigators that infiltrated that. That's where my concern is. And I'm sure it's a concern of law enforcement, starting at the FBI and all the way down to the local Shaler Township or the city of Pittsburgh, police departments.
Yeah. Well, one other question with regard to Pennsylvania again, and what do either of you see as an outcome to this dispute over whether the pre-postmarked ballots, but late in arriving ballots are counted? That, of course, is in dispute as we speak, and could be a pivotal thing in an election so close.
Sure. Yeah, the issue involves ballots that are postmarked by election day, but arrive no later than Friday following the election day. Now, for decades, at least as far back as the Second World War, we have by statute been counting military ballots who meet those conditions, because we know that our people in the armed forces are often stationed far from where they are supposed to vote. So there's always been that grace period for them. Now, the Supreme Court was asked to extend that for mail-in ballots generally, because this is really the first time we're doing this. And Justice Max Baer ruled that indeed that could happen, that we could count any ballot that was postmarked by Election Day and arrive before no later than Friday after Election Day. So that gets, as appeals from the state Supreme Court go, that gets appealed to the United States Supreme Court. And Justice Alito opined that it was really sort of too late to hear that right now, but it could be revisited after the election. And we believe that it will be revisited if those votes can make a difference. They very well might make a difference now. So it's likely that this could be before the United States Supreme Court. The analogy the Commonwealth will draw is, look, we've been doing this forever because the Postal Service can't assure that military ballots will get here on time. As long as they're postmarked by Election Day, that's fine. So we're just extending that. But the Constitution says that the legislature gets to set the time and manner of elections, presidential elections in each of the states. And that's what Justice Alito was looking at. Is this something that the state legislature should have authorized and not the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania?
So this is the first time we've done mail-in voting here in Pennsylvania. And we're going to learn lessons from it. They may be good lessons, they may be bad lessons. But I think it's one that the legislature should, after this is all over and the dust has settled, sit down with the administration here in Pennsylvania, with the governor, and at least have a discussion is, how do we rectify that, or should we? Do we need to rectify it? If the election is on Tuesday, is postmarked by Tuesday, clearly is postmarked when it's received on Friday, should it be counted? Or should we move the date that it has to be postmarked by, maybe a week before, for mail-in ballots? Absentee ballots are probably always going to be that way. The absentee ballots traditionally really didn't make a difference in an election. Mail-in ballots, and with the amount of voting that took place through mail-in ballots, really will make a big difference. And so I think there's going to be some lessons learned. Policy wonks in colleges like yours, Rick, and Duquesne and all across are going to have an opportunity to weigh in and maybe do papers as to what's the best way to do mail-in ballots, because frankly, I think it's the future. And the parties are going to have to come up with new schemes from what they've usually done in campaigns for the last 100 years. They always get their ground votes out, and you'll still see that. But how do we get the mail-in ballot out, the vote out? I think the Democrats did a very good job. I don't think the Republicans were looking to do that. They were showing up at the polls.
Rick, let me talk about some of the lessons learned. And I want to go back to the question about violence, because law enforcement, the courts, and the election department all anticipated some violence at the polls, and we're actually ready for it and trained for it. And we didn't have it, which is a good thing. But one of the lessons we learned is that we have it backwards in Pennsylvania. And this is another thing that has to be corrected legislatively in the months or years before the next, perhaps before the next election, certainly before the next presidential race, because the passions run high. In Pennsylvania, you can carry an AR-15 into the voting booth and vote. There's no prohibition against that. But a police officer is required to be 100 feet away from the polling place for fear that the presence of the police officer would intimidate a voter. So we have these conflicting statutes or regulations, and that's something we probably have to look at. You know, there are other cities that actually went in the other direction and placed a police officer at every polling place, or a deputy sheriff, a law enforcement officer at every polling place, just to sort of ward off the suggestion of violence. I don't think violence was likely, but a common voter suppression technique is to show the threat of violence. And that keeps a lot of people away from the polls.
Well, I want to reassure both of you, by the way, that in fact, in my most recently concluded class in elective politics and policymaking, in which I focus on state and local government, there was more than one student chose as their subject matter for their final paper election laws. So this is a good time to marry all those Heinz college policy students with all those law students at Duquesne, I hope are tuned in as well, seriously, to look at election law, because I think it is clear, as you both have emphasized, we made some steps forward, but we have a lot of adjustments and concerns to address, and one of which has been emphasized by the president in terms of, in simple terms, our elections are fraudulent. Do you, either of you, feel that Pennsylvania is at risk with fraudulent, if you will, practices in our elections?
I don't believe that that's a legitimate claim. The problem is this. There has never in the history of elections been a perfect election. You know, these are enterprises on a grand scale, subject to human frailty. You know, you're always going to have some problems, and you address those, but you can't use that as an excuse or an example of fraud. It's just in the nature of things. We run really good elections here in Allegheny County in particular. Even when this was a machine town, it was a Republican machine town up to 1932, and then a Democratic machine town on forward until probably 1968 and the disintegration of the Democratic Party. But throughout that entire period, we've run fair elections because we've taken pride in keeping that sort of separate, off to the side a little bit. And that's the way it is in most places. People take this part of government very, very seriously.
I think the issue of fraud is out there because there are instances where fraud has taken place in the past. You may recall, Rick, go back to the 1960 election in Illinois and Mayor Daley holding out the votes from Chicago until we found out what the votes were coming in from Southern Illinois. And then the votes from Chicago came in and, oh my goodness, they outvoted Nixon for Kennedy, and he won Illinois, and then he went on to win the election. Now, I don't know that anybody went in and did the analysis, which one was fraudulent, but there certainly is the belief that numbers were manufactured. You could go to Texas, and LBJ's first election as Congress. There was clear evidence that people voted who were long dead. They went to the cemeteries, and they got some of those. You go back early in the Texas Republic, and they used to bring people in from Mexico to the border counties to vote for who they wanted them to vote for, and sent them back to Mexico and helped them out. The border was really nothing at that point in time, very different from today. So absent some clear fraud, you shouldn't be talking about fraud. But I will tell you, when the numbers from Philadelphia come in, if they make up the difference, there's certainly going to be allegations. Oh, there had to be something wrong. You know, they came in with the numbers late. They always came in with the numbers before. They didn't count the numbers until they knew what the vote totals were that they needed. Going back to the question of mail-in ballots, maybe we should at least open those mail-in ballots, take out the ballot envelope, put it aside, don't count it, but get it started, get it listed through the barcode that this person voted ahead, or as it's received, so they're all sitting to the side, so that we can speed it up, because everybody wants election night to be the result. I think for the next few years, it's going to be a while before we see election night determining the race, unless it's an absolute landslide across the country.
Yeah, the truth is we've never known on election night, because whatever the results, they have to be certified according to law. And as we become more evenly divided in our views and our political allegiances, very few races are that clear at the end of election night, that even the anticipated result by the media is something you can rely on.
Yeah. Actually, some of the questions I've asked you have already been coming in from Q&A, so I know they're piling up. But let me bring up one question, which I think is really important to raise, that so far I don't see on the Q&A. So I'll take the prerogative of being the moderator, and that is, let's talk about the state legislature for a moment. The governor, and Joe, you didn't disagree with this, predicted that the legislature is probably going to remain majority party in both chambers.
Yes.
First of all, I guess, is there any dispute of that, or do you both feel that that's pretty well where it's going to end up? And secondly, can you elaborate on the question of reapportionment, which will determine the districts of Congress and state legislators in Pennsylvania? Just I know it gets complicated, but just to highlight the importance of that process, which will be closely watched this coming year. And a number of students I know are interested in it, by the way.
Gov, you want me to go?
Yeah, I'll chime in when
We have a bifurcated redistricting system in Pennsylvania. And as for Congress, the control of the state legislature in terms of drawing our congressional districts is really vital, because our congressional districts are drawn as you would adopt any other piece of legislation in the state legislature. The truth is that most of the hard work on how those districts should be drawn is really done in Washington with the Republican National Committee or the Democratic National Committee. They have the experts, and they know how, what the nuances are in each district, and they know how to shape them, and they send that to the their controlling counterparts in the state legislature, and they then introduce a bill that encompasses the map and the narrative that describes the districts. Now, the state legislature happens a different way. We have a redistricting commission, and that commission consists of the 4 leaders of the caucuses of the House and the Senate. So it's split evenly between Democrats and Republicans. They have to pick a chair. That chair, when they cannot agree upon it, and they often cannot agree on who the chair would be, because there's great political advantage in any 5-member commission as to who the chair is. That chair is then appointed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Now, in years past, when the court has had to appoint that chair, a Republican court, and you wonder why justice is Republican or Democratic, how can that be? Well, we have a popularly elected Supreme Court. So they have party affiliation. And when the party affiliation, a majority of the justices is a Republican, the chair of that redistricting commission is a Republican. And if it's a Democrat, if the Democrats control the Supreme Court, the chair as appointed by the Supreme Court will be a Democrat. So that's where the advantage comes in there. And when you have a 5-member commission, 2 votes don't get it. They just don't get it. So if when it comes to redrawing the map for the next 10 years, based upon the current census data, once it's certified, the control of the Supreme Court is really critical.
Well, and also in recent time, and I'll bring this up because of the renown of CMU when it comes to technology and computers and so forth, drawing maps has become much more computerized. And it has to take into considerations that really 30, 40 years ago, they didn't take into consideration of the diversity of trying to bring a balance to the districts and so forth. And when you're talking about Hamilton's in the room where it happened, boy, redistricting was the room where it happened, and deals were made. And I can tell you that the last time we did a congressional delegation when I was governor, all the congressmen signed off on it, Republican and Democrat. They all got their say. I want this borough. I don't want all of that borough. So they all had their input on it. And then we ended up having the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania go, nah, we're not going to go along with that. And part of the problem that I see, especially from a lawyer's perspective, but I guess it's that way everywhere, I almost wish the justices didn't run on a party ballot, that they ran as independents or something else like that, because it always, exactly what Joe said, well, the Democrats did this or the Republicans did that. And it always causes that, and you're going to see it more and more, especially with social media, the divide between us all will be driven by, well, that party did this or this party did that. So redistricting is very interesting. Joe, you didn't answer the question, and so I guess you agree that the control of the House and control of the Senate in Pennsylvania will remain in Republican hands.
Yes,
What's interesting, and it's a race, Rick, that you need to take a look at, is Frank Dermody is the minority leader of the House, and he's in the race of his life right now against Kerry Del Rosso up in the Oakmont into the Kiski Valley area. And at the last time I looked, he was losing at that. That would be a 30-year veteran. That would be a huge surprise in the election. And I think there's some other surprises out in the election. Joe Pachorka, who's been a longtime Democrat, who actually worked with me 35 years ago. It looks like he's losing his seat in the House at the moment. Everything qualified by, we're still waiting to see what the Mellon say. So there's a lot to look at across Pennsylvania. The congressional seat that I think is interesting is one, and I don't know, I really don't know the congresswoman's name. She took former Congressman Charlie Dent's place over in the Allentown area. And she's a Democrat. That looks like the Republicans are going to pick that one up again. So that would give them they'd have 12 members of Congress, and the remainder would be Democrats.
Let me just touch on redistricting and reapportionment one last time. If you like this stuff, if you like politics, it is the sweetest spot to be in. Being in that room when the lines are being drawn is really, it's like politics in ether. It's wonderful stuff. I've been involved in 3 apportionment or reapportionment commissions at the local level and at the state level, and it really determines the future of the next 10 years of that unit of government. So it's very important.
Yeah.
And it's good to see somebody like Joe involved in it, because while he is partisan to a certain extent, he is practical and he is reasonable to work with. We've worked together now since 1991, I guess it was, Joe.
91, yeah.
And we need to have more people reasonable in government and not be so locked into one position or the other.
I want to note that was what I emphasized on your introduction, because I can vouch for that because I've known both of you longer than 1991. So, and it's the kind of relationship that I think we just need more and more of in politics, and let's hope it can reestablish some of that. One of the questions, it's pretty clear that whoever wins the Electoral College, the popular vote has been clear, and that has gone to Biden. So this raises the whole question that one of the students has raised, and that is, what about the Electoral College? Is it time to do away with it? Is it, are we really a United States when in fact we may be electing someone who has not been gotten the popular vote? I guess that's the simple question.
Well, the Electoral College reform comes up every time this happens. And then it's forgotten about in the ensuing months after the election. And then as another presidential race approaches, people, they'll chatter a little bit about, hey, well, what do you think about this Electoral College? Well, it's too late to do anything at that point. So we may talk about it forever, but there's not a great deal of interest in seeing this changed by the smaller states and by the Republican Party, because it's actually the one way that you can control the executive branch while you're in a substantial minority position in terms of voter registration. So, I don't see it changing, and the pendulum swings. This could flip and be advantage Democrats at some point. But it's only talked about when there's a crisis. We've had a crisis like this several times now. It seems to be more the rule than the exception these days, but it's forgotten quickly.
I go back and say that the founding fathers who drew this up just had vision well beyond anybody's imagination. And they came up with this reason because they saw there was a divide in the country just to begin with, North versus South. They knew in the 13 original colonies, they knew there was a divide. And how do we keep them together? This is one way that they keep them together, is by sharing their votes in a certain way. Keep in mind, they created a Senate with 2 people in it, and the House with 1 per certain amount of population. A state like the size of Wyoming has 1 congressman, but they have 2 senators. So they were bringing balance to it. And I think with the Electoral College, they were bringing balance. And 200 and some years later, we're looking at it. It's not industrial versus agrarian. It's not North versus South. It's the coast versus the middle of the country. It's conservatives and liberals or Democrats or whatever you want to call them. But in the end, everybody accepts it and we get along. I'm concerned if it became a popular vote, there could be a lot of mischief that takes place. And to me, you don't like the results sometimes, but it's worked for 200 and some years.
You know, the founders were worried about the oppression of the minority by the majority. And one argument against the Electoral College is that the majority is now being oppressed by the minority. But as I said, I don't think we'll ever get to this reform.
A big debate. Let me go back to the Pennsylvania debate, since we've got 2 eminently qualified people to. The question that I'm getting is, it's clear that Pennsylvania, again, has been the center of this presidential outcome. And it is a swing state. And I guess the question is twofold. Where do you see the key factors that have swayed this to Trump's side or to Biden's side that might be defined as swing voters? I could think of a couple of examples. And secondly, do you think the state, given the way this has come down, the increased Republican registration from this past election, is it going to continue to be a swing state, or is it going clearly in one direction and it'll become a red state or a blue state again?
You know, this was bound to happen. It was bound to be Pennsylvania. And we are the perfect example of a purple state. We have 8 million voters. 4 out of the 5 last presidential elections were decided with less than 6%. Democrats always say if we win by 4 or 5%, we call it a landslide in Pennsylvania. President Trump won in 2016 with 44,000 votes, under 1% of those votes cast. We have 2 United States senators. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican. Up until this election, we had 18 members of Congress, 9 Democrats, 9 Republicans. We have a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature. We have 20 electoral votes. So this was bound. It was bound to come down to Pennsylvania. You know, we are the purple state that everybody talks about. And I think we'll remain that way for some time.
And we were, because again, you go back to my conversation about this country, East versus West. Well, here we have Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and then everything in between. It's very rural. We have the 2nd largest rural population in the United States exists here in Pennsylvania. When you think about it, agriculture is our #1 industry. Most people don't think about it that way. So we are very diverse in our occupations, in our interests, but we're a keystone state. We're in the middle of the country when it comes to transportation, getting people to jobs and so forth. So everybody, Republicans and Democrats, they like this state. And over the years, you can go back to before Roosevelt, this was a pretty Pennsylvania, it was a pretty Republican state. Roosevelt came in and started swinging more to the left. Now it's starting to even out, even though I think the Democrats still hold a 700,000 registration edge. But Republicans like myself, when I was running, it was over a million person registration edge for the Democrats. If you don't get Democrats to vote for you, you can't win. I was able to get Democrats to vote. This election last night or yesterday, clearly there were many, many Democrats that voted for Donald Trump. There were many Republicans that voted for Mr. Biden. So I agree with Joe. We're a swing state. We're not going to be a South Dakota or Wyoming or a California because we have too many interests here. And I think that's healthy.
Let me, a related thing that I'm not sure all our listeners might be, our participants might be aware of, but, you know, it's interesting to hear your analysis of the results of the congressional and legislative races, and at the same time have such a close race at the presidential level. And that might partly be explained by the straight party line vote and the difference now that you basically have to make separate choices. Do you want to just elaborate on that briefly as to how that might have influenced what we've seen in Pennsylvania this election?
Well, that was the great trade, if you want to talk about a great deal being made. Democrats clamored for mail-in voting, and the Republicans said, well, we'll agree with that. That benefits us too, but what we want in exchange is the elimination of the ability to vote straight party ticket. You used to go in and make one X on your ballot. Your paper ballot meant that you voted for all the Democratic candidates in the general election or all the Republican candidates. And then it became one lever. You'd pull one lever, then one button, or touch one spot on the screen. And you would vote. Then we had coattails, and you would vote for everybody down the line. If you had a strong head of the ticket, that benefited everybody else who was a member of that party. That's gone now. That was, that went out when mail-in voting came in. I don't know yet the impact of that. I don't know, Governor. Do you have?
Well,
I
on
that yet?
What I find interesting, and I totally agree with you on that, is look in the middle. Look at the row officers for the Attorney General, the Auditor General, and the Treasurer. When I went to bed last night with the numbers that were in, the Republicans were leading in all three. If we still had straight ballot voting, that wouldn't have happened. So people were splitting off and not voting just straight Democrat. Now they can go in and do it individually, but I was surprised, and I'm still surprised by the most recent numbers I saw today, that the Republicans are winning those races. Now we don't have Philadelphia in yet, so we'll see what happens if they make it up there. But that was a shock to me based upon performances and the registration edge of 800,000-900,000 people. I thought the Republicans would have a hard chance of winning one, not less, let alone three. There's a possibility they could win all three row offices. That would be a shock to the political system of Pennsylvania.
It sure would. Now the governor and I agree on this because we've talked about it. Eliminating the straight party ability is probably a good thing. I mean, it will force both parties, both major parties, to come up with a higher quality candidates, and that's in everybody's interest. As a matter of public policy, the governor and I would both hold our own party's feet to the fire on this and suggest that they simply feel better candidates in an attempt to pull those voters in, as opposed to just having somebody go in and pull one lever.
Let me make an ad here real quick, Rick. We have a lot of students online watching this, I assume. I think you said the number was 600-700 people are watching this. Consider running for office. Consider service at the local level or the county level or the state level. We need good people. Caveat, have a thick hide, a real thick hide. All you have to do is watch all the TV ads that are out there. And I think that deters a lot of good people from willing to run for office. But we need good people to run for office.
I always tell prospective candidates, you got to have that fire in your belly if you're going to run for office. And remember, it hurts when you lose. So if you don't think you can handle that, don't run. But the benefits, I think, are far greater.
Yeah, in my class, I actually do a whole little session, not this past semester, but on the political personality.
Yeah.
It's a really, really interesting thing to consider. But I want to note with both of you, in case there are late arrivals to this session, that Joe started out as a borough council person in East McKeesport, and the governor started out as the township commissioner in Shaler Township. So you're perfect examples of people who took the risk and stayed with it. So
Listen, when I was on borough council in East McKeesport, they paid me $40 a month and I was worth every penny.
yeah, but you were the big shot in town, by
Yeah,
the way.
I was a swing vote.
That's for sure. Let me go back to one question that actually we talked about a bit, but just a quick projection. Clearly, the mail-in ballot, which was fortunate, perhaps in light of COVID-19 coming about in Pennsylvania, do you think that this is going to continue at the level of utilization, or will it go way back down if and when COVID goes? Let's say by the next presidential election.
I think it'll continue. I think it's going to be very difficult for the legislature to retract that ability. Clearly, it increased turnout. I'm sure there were some new people that went to the polls, but the fact that they could just write it down, fill it out, and send it in ahead of time and not worry about standing in lines or any of that, it increased turnout. I'm not opposed to seeing increased turnout. Maybe some people are, but I like to see people exercising their democratic right to vote. I think we can refine it. We can make it a little bit better, but I don't see walking this back. Do you, Joe?
No, I think this is the future. Governor and I had a hard-fought battle over voter ID in some years ago, right? A few years ago. Well, there's no reason to fight over that anymore because I think pretty soon there'll be far fewer votes showing up in person than there will be cast by mail.
I might add that whether it's phone or internet or whatever, if we get all the cybersecurity right at Carnegie Mellon, you might see something beyond mail-in balloting. In fact, the nature of our elections can change. But here's one that I'm going to ask because one of my students did some work on this, so I'm going to assume it's from her. But what do you two think about ranked choice voting? And you can explain it quickly if you wish.
I still believe in the two-party system. I think every party should pick their best shot in the primary election process and put them on a ballot and have them go head to head.
Yeah,
I'm comfortable with that. I think it's simple, and the parties stand for something. They each stand for something. Each party has its own philosophy and approach to government. And I think that provides voters with the clearest choice as to how we move forward.
I agree. I think it represents the perspectives of primarily two different viewpoints: liberal, conservative, whatever you want to call it, moderate. There are a couple states that you have to reach 50% in order to move on to a runoff. I think that might happen in Georgia with one of the Senate seats. I like primaries. It tests the candidate in the primary if they have an opposition, gets them ready for the general election. It allows the people to know what their views are during that period of time. And sometimes I wish our primary were a little bit earlier. And there's other times when you're walking around in January getting signatures on a ballot that you wish it was later so that you didn't have to walk around in the cold. But I think it's a good exercise. I don't think it's broken. So I don't fix things that aren't broken.
Yeah. Let me, well, that brings up the idea, in fact, of the future, and you might comment just in terms of Pennsylvania, since it's our focal point right now. What do you see the future of the parties, and given the increase in independence, even in a very party-aligned state like Pennsylvania?
Well, I think the parties have to do a better job. And as we were saying earlier about the elimination of the single lever or the single button or the ability to vote a straight party ticket, this will force them to do a better job. So I think that's really in the best interest of the Commonwealth. And I like the open. Look at the governor and I in what we've managed to accomplish together, even though we were from separate parties. I remember in the early 90s, he came into. I got a call from my assistant that the United States Attorney was there to see me when I was the mayor's chief of staff, and that gave me pause. I had to gather my thoughts for a few minutes because I thought he was coming down to tell me someone was getting indicted, which is a common custom in Allegheny County. There's a courtesy call from the U.S. Attorney. But he came in and said, look, there's a project that the Justice Department is thinking about called Weed and Seed. And it involves law enforcement and social services. And what do you think? Can we work together and build something here? Well, I just promised the developers of Crawford Square that I'd have a solution, a public safety solution or plan for that neighborhood, and I didn't have one. And then the U.S. Attorney, Republican U.S. Attorney, walks into the Democratic mayor's office and says, here's the solution. And that's how we ended up with a brand new neighborhood in the Hill District called Crawford Square.
Governor, you want to add anything to that? I think that's a great.
And that's exactly, we work together, okay? If you're asking about what do I see coming, I call politics is a pendulum. It swings back and forth. Each party swings back and forth. I had a history professor that in American history, when we were in college, when we were learning it, we learned everything about 15, 20 years, not just the history, but the culture, the music, the literature, and it all has an effect on politics. So if you look at our history there, you see parties go to the left, they go to the right, they come back to the middle. We have moderate Republicans, we have liberal or conservative Republicans, we have moderate Democrats, we have progressive Democrats. Democrats right now, in my opinion, and Joe and I have talked about it, are going through what Republicans went through 10 years ago with the Tea Party, where the Tea Party came in and they said, it's our way or the highway. If you don't agree with everything we want, we're not going to support you. You see many of the progressives, and we see it here in Western Pennsylvania, we see it up in New York and everything, that the progressives are saying they're taking on the established Democratic Party. It's our way or the highway. That's not unnatural. It's a little hot right now, and we'll see where the Democratic Party goes. If Vice President Biden wins and becomes president, he's going to have a powder keg to handle in his own party and with his vice president and her positions, because they aren't philosophically naturally aligned at this point in time. With President Trump, I guarantee you, everybody's going to start saying, if he gets reelected, the campaigns for president 4 years from now already will start.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm getting the hook. I can't thank you two enough, but I will agree to come to your class again as sort of a quid pro quo.
I'm gonna hold you to that, right?
I want to make note of all the folks that joined us from Carnegie Mellon and all the folks that joined us from Duquesne. This could be the start of a kind of a partnership with the law school and the Heinz Public Policy School.
For that.
I'm yours at your request, and even at La Prima, I'll show up anytime you ask me to.
But COVID's over.
A lot of business done on La Prima's prison. Let me
We're
tell
all
you.
waiting for that. I want to remind everybody in closing that this session was recorded, so it can be and hopefully will be shared. And we'll be able to watch it in another month and see how the predictions worked out. And I also want to thank the Heinz College, Carnegie Mellon, and Duquesne folks who put this all together and made it possible. And one last note is that there is the expectation that probably we'll have to wait until December, but to have a follow-up perspective on looking at the whole implications, how it happened, and what it means for the future of America, this election. But this has been the room where it happens, and I think very, if you will, relevant to the exactly where we sit right now, and we can end this and everybody can get back to the television and see what results came in the last hour. So thanks very much. A good day, and everybody stay safe.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Joe, see you in an hour.
You got it, Gov.